Today in Awesome Stories, we are going to talk about an English horror film called Await Further Instructions. Spoilers ahead. We start in London where a couple, Nick and Angie, arrive at Nick's parents' house for the Christmas holidays. Nick is not happy to see his parents, but Angie tries to get him in the mood. They are greeted by Nick's mother, Beth, who is happy to meet Angie. Nick wants to see his father, but her mother tells him to let him come down. Nick's grandfather watches TV when Nick introduces Angie, but he doesn't seem too happy to meet her. Nick's father, Tony, comes downstairs and complains why he didn't give advance notice about coming to the holidays. Angie introduces herself to Tony, trying to get out of the awkward situation. Angie goes outside and tries to call her mother, but she doesn't have any signal. Nick sees their old Christmas tree and his dad wants to have a normal holiday with his family. Nick dismisses him, making the grandfather show his disappointments with his son and his grandson. Nick's sister, Kate, arrives at the house with her boyfriend Scott and greets the family. Kate is pregnant and is due in 2 weeks, making her mood unstable. On the TV, the news talks about a possible terrorist attack, and the grandfather blames the immigrants in the country. When Angie says he's wrong, Kate sides with her grandfather, making Nick mad about the whole situation. Tony asks Nick to apologize to Kate, but he decides to go upstairs. Beth follows him and begs him not to leave, but he's too frustrated to stay. Upstairs, Nick tells Angie that they will wake up early before the family and head home to have Christmas alone. In the morning, they go downstairs, and when Nick opens the door, he sees a barrier of black cables blocking the exit. Nick sees that the windows are also barricaded. He goes to the garage and grabs an axe to try to break the cables, but the barricade doesn't budge. The family tries to figure out what is happening, and Beth suspects that it can be a reality show. Tony thinks that the government quarantined them because of some kind of disaster. Nick goes check the news and sees a message overriding every channel. The message says to stay indoors and await further instructions. The family realizes that they have no communication outside of the house, including the landlines. Tony calls Scott aside and asks him to back him up in whatever they need to do to lead the family. Tony says that while they wait for rescue, they are going to have a proper Christmas. After the prayer, Angie coughs, trumping the grandfather to make an off-color remark about her. Kate starts suspecting that Angie is infected, causing a fight between them. Tony gets up with a knife in his hand and tells everybody to be quiet. When he goes to cut the turkey, a new message shows up on the TV and says that all the food is contaminated and they shouldn't eat any of it. While Tony grabs all the food, Kate complains to Scott that he's not being a man and should protect her. Nick tells his dad to not throw the food away when Scott gets in between them. Nick doesn't know how long they will be quarantined and wants to save some food, but Scott says that they can survive weeks with just water. Tony intends to ration the bottled water that they bought for the holidays. The message in the TV changes and tells them to decontaminate themselves using household bleach. In their bedroom, Angie and Nick play around and scrub themselves as Beth hears them from the outside of the door. Beth tries to get Tony in the mood for sex, but he scolds her, saying that they are in a life and death situation. Angie and Nick are sleeping when Beth comes to get them downstairs and talk with the family. Tony explains why he's being so harsh, and while Angie and Nick are apologizing, a bag of needles drops through the chimney. A message appears on the TV telling them to use the vaccination kit because the atmosphere is polluted. The family is not sure who is going to be the first one to use the kit. Angie tells them that the needles are dangerous since they are not sterilized, but Tony decides to inject himself anyway. They sterilize the needles and Scott decides to go next. Seeing that no one is volunteering, the grandfather calls them cowards and injects himself. Tony takes a needle and injects it on Beth, ignoring Nick's warnings. Tony takes another needle to Kate, but she doesn't want to risk the baby's health. Tony and Scott try to convince Kate, but Nick advises her not to do it. After stop to think, she decides to inject herself anyway. Nick tells Angie that they don't have a choice and they inject themselves. The grandfather starts shaking on his chair and dies on the floor, vomiting blood, while the family looks at him in terror. After seeing that, Tony says that the same would happen to them if they hadn't taken the vaccine. A message on the TV tells them that the vaccination procedure is complete and they should return the medical equipment through an opening on the wall. While Tony and Scott cover the body, Nick tries to find a path out of the house, but the barrier is everywhere. Scott returns the medical equipment and decides to scream for help through the opening, but it closes on his hand, severing his fingers. While Angie is suturing Scott's hand, Nick goes to see his grandfather with his dad. Tony narrates an episode when his dad beat him for wetting the bed and tells Nick that he doesn't know the responsibilities of being a father like him. After some time, Tony wakes up Nick to see a message on the TV telling them someone is infected and the person should be isolated. Kate accuses Angie of being the one and they vote to get her isolated upstairs. Nick decides to attack the men, but he's overpowered by his dad. Beth starts to sing, making them stop the fight. They decide to isolate Angie with the grandfather's body. Angie suspects that someone is watching them through the TV and giving orders according to their reaction. Nick goes to the living room and decides to turn off the TV when Kate goes in and shouts at him. She calls for her dad and Tony is able to turn the TV back on, but there's a message saying what Nick did costs lives. Kate starts hitting Nick and when he pushes her back, Scott attacks him. They start fighting going upstairs while Kate screams behind them. When they get upstairs, Scott accidentally pushes Nick against Kate, who falls on her back, breaking her leg. They ask Scott for help since he works in a hospital, but he's too shocked to respond. They bring Kate to a table and decide to treat her, but Tony decides to get out of the room. Beth talks to the TV and asks for help to treat Kate, but there's no answer. Angie tells him Kate has a compound fracture and she will die if there's no medical attention. Nick tries to get help from his mother, but she decides to go clean the house. Nick creates a hole on the wall of the bathroom and puts a phone through it to see what's on the other side. A warning message appears on the TV saying that they should not breach the perimeter. Tony sees the message and takes Scott with him to find Nick. Nick sees something attack the phone, but he gives the phone to Tony. He puts the phone in his pocket. Tony knocks Nick out, fasts him to a chair and gags him. On the TV, there's a new order to extract information from the sleeper agent. Tony gets a few tools from his toolbox and prepares himself to torture Nick. Nick pleads with him to stop listening to the TV, but he starts to torture him anyway. Tony prepares himself to take Nick's eye out when Beth screams and tells them that Kate is dead. While Beth and Scott get Nick out of the room, Angie investigates the cables coming from the wall and finds a TV. When she turns the TV on, a message appears on the screen, startling Angie. She opens the back of the TV and it's shocked with what she sees inside. Suddenly, the rooms upstairs start filling with a black smoke, with Angie and Beth locked inside. Nick is able to open Angie's door when he hears his mother asking for help in the other room. He tries to break the glass, but the room fills with black smoke and kills her. They go downstairs and try to cover the gaps, but the smoke stops. The TV starts to emit a green light. Nick grabs a log and goes to smash it, but the house starts shaking. On the TV, a new message appears saying, "I am reborn and I bring salvation." Tony sees the crucifix above the TV and wonders if it's God talking to them. Tony asks the TV to give them a sign when Kate's belly starts to move. Tony says that God showed them a sign and they should worship it. The TV shows Scott the baby's name, which makes him believe that TV is something divine. Nick goes to Angie and she tells him that she found something with a heartbeat when she opened the TV upstairs. Tony worships the TV while Scott touches Kate's belly. Nick and Angie wake up on a beautiful field when Angie is grabbed by Tony, who has a knife in his hand. On the TV, they see a message saying they should sacrifice someone to save the baby. Angie tells Scott that she will perform a cesarean on Beth if he lets her go. When Scott lets Nick go, Tony tries to stab him, but he punches Tony and frees Angie. While Nick fights Tony, Scott takes Angie to Beth's body to save the baby. Tony drops Nick and Angie asks Scott to help him, but Tony stabs Scott with an axe. Nick is taking a beating from Tony when Angie attacks him with a knife, but he drops her. Nick jumps on him and tries to strangle him with the axe, but Tony takes him off. Tony strangles Nick when Angie beats him on the head with a bottle. Seeing that Tony is still alive, he drops the TV on his head. While Nick's hugging Angie, the TV breaks, showing a creature with a heartbeat inside of it. Cables burst through the windows and attach themselves to Tony. With cables controlling his head, Tony stands up and the cables give him the axe. The couple runs to another room while the house is taken by the cables. When the noise stops, Tony puts his head through the door and demands their worship or they will face extinction. Furious, Nick opens the door and tells the creature to kill him, but the creature is a parasite and they are the only ones alive. Nick throws a bottle at the creature's heart, short-circuiting it. Suddenly, the creature comes back, captures the couple and uses Tony to kill them. Tony puts a TV in front of Kate and sits on the couch. The creature connects to the TV and burns Kate's body, saving the baby. The TV calls her Ruby and asks her to worship. Outside the house, we see the entire neighborhood covered with cables. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like. It really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.